Douglas Everett was born in Vancouver in 1927. He grew up in a very competitive family. His brothers and sisters were all skilled athletes, and his father was an excellent salesperson.
He was a real competitor. He loved to fight, and he loved merchandising. Came through the Depression and the Second World War, and finally accumulated enough that he could buy Dominion Motors, which was bankrupt. He turned it into a profit within a matter of months. It became the largest Ford dealer in Canada.
The business eventually grew to 3 dealerships across Canada, along with a successful property company called Royal Canadian. But the original dealership at Fort and Graham included a small filling station.
Well, we had 3 elderly pumps on the property at Fort and Graham, and we used them largely to fill up the rental cars. A taxi company not very far away from us started selling gas at 2 cents off. My father insisted that since we sold the best for less, that we would compete, and we did. My brother and I wanted to meet the price of 2 cents off a gallon. My father insisted on going 5 cents off a gallon. And we filled the street, Graham Avenue, both from Main Street through to beyond the Eaton Building, was lined up with cars. So that got us into the gas business in a big way.
Dominion Motors operated 2 gasoline stations, and Doug felt that they were very profitable and he wanted to expand those.
Doug, I think, even then sensed that there was a change coming about. And what he brought, and which I saw very early on, a very strong entrepreneurial spirit, that he was going to build something. And he got the concept of selling the product that a car needs, and particularly petroleum products. And so you saw the birth. I was there to see the birth of Domo Gas. And in the initial stages of it, he actually appeared on television saying, "We jump to the pumps." And very quickly thereafter, they transposed a kangaroo for Doug, and sales increased.
The issue is, how do you compete against 2 of the largest corporations in Canada, being Shell and Imperial Oil? So what Doug came up with was a brilliant solution along with Sheldon Bowles, and they approached large retail stores like Safeway, who had very large parking lots, and they proposed to Safeway that they would lease just a little plot of land at the front of the parking lot by the roadway, and to put up a small, very elegant 2-pump gas kiosk. And because of the small footprint and the small kiosk, there were large savings in terms of overhead in operating that business, and that overhead allowed them to pass those savings on to the customer in terms of lower gas prices.
I remember one time a customer of Dominion Motors who was an enormously difficult person to deal with. And at some point during the conversation, he started to take after people at Dominion Motors personally, et cetera, et cetera. So I lit into him. Well, at that point, Doug Everett returned from lunch at my door, and he listened to me, and his face grew red. And he lit into me and said, nobody, but nobody in the whole organization was ever allowed to speak to a customer that way except for him. So I gave him the name and the phone number, and he stormed off down the hall and upstairs to his office. He arrived back at the door about 10 minutes later. He said, "Do you remember what I told you about nobody but nobody in this business talks to a customer the way you did except for me?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "That still stands. Except for Mr. Jones." He said, "He's a nutcase, isn't he?" He said, "The problem was," he says, "you just didn't light into him hard enough." And he turned laughing, and off he went back up the stairs.
In 1966, Doug was appointed as a senator by then Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson.
I think I was 10 when my father was appointed to the Senate, so we grew up with him being a very busy man. When the house was sitting, he would leave Monday night and be back Thursday for Senate business. And then, of course, in a dealership, he worked Saturdays. You know, my friends have said to me, you didn't see him much growing up. And I feel the reverse. I mean, I never felt his absence. I only felt his presence.
One interesting part of his tenure is that later on as a senator, when he couldn't support the government's position on the GST and free trade, he elected to become an independent senator so that he could vote with his conscience.
For the last couple of years he's in the Senate, he couldn't get there as often as he felt he should. He was still going, but he felt he wasn't there as often as he should be, so he made the decision to donate his salary back to the government. We would laugh with him that the best press he got was from the National Enquirer, you know, right up there with the story of boy gets abducted from family picnic by Martians, was senator from Winnipeg donates salary back to the Crown.
When I was appointed to the Senate, I hired someone to keep things organized, and Sheldon was the one I hired. I managed to luck into a group of people over the years that have helped run Domo. Just people who really had an instinct for providing the best and standing behind it. We have people upwards of 50 years have been with us and buy into the Domo concept. They're the people that made the thing happen.
Doug's connection to the community is pretty well documented. You walk in the St. Boniface Hospital, and there's the Doug and Patty Everett atrium. But what I think those of us who've worked with him have found that there's also an enormous amount of looking after the community and looking after individual people that Doug has done quietly and anonymously and nobody knows about. He was always aware of people and situations in need.
I know of occasions when I suggested that a particular agency that I was interested in needed help, but I wasn't soliciting money. The next thing I knew, that I heard from the agency that they had received a donation from Doug Everett. And he didn't mention it to me that he had done it. He went and did it, and I had to hear it from them, not from him. And I think that's been his approach. A real community citizen of both Manitoba and of Canada.
I think Doug's greatest legacy are his children. He's managed now to pass this business down to the third generation. There are very, very few businesses that are able to both grow and to be passed down from generation to generation successfully. I think that speaks to the caliber of the man that he was able to make this happen.
I do think that it is unique to see the kind of involvement of virtually every member of the family in one form or another. Doug is very pleased, I'm sure. I know he's pleased to be still able to be there and to be very proud of what his children are doing.
I think we all have kept in the business because my father makes it fun. We had what we called Everett Family Fun Days on Sundays, and we'd go skating or snowmobiling out at the farm, or in the summer down at Monackey at our family cottage. If it was a beautiful moonlit night, he'd wake us all up at midnight and with my mother take us in our wooden boat and go down the river and wake up two other families, and we'd go to this lovely idyllic island we called Corfu, and we'd have a midnight picnic, you know, snacks and swimming. And my father was just made it fun. He was always around with us.
We used to have hysterical times when we traveled, because if he were driving, I would always be very concerned that we would get lost, because he insisted that his navigational background in the Navy guaranteed us that we would arrive at the place we set out to arrive at. We invariably, if we arrived at it, it was by the grace of God rather than Doug's navigational skills. We didn't agree on politics, and we didn't agree on most things that we had read or taught. But we have remained very good friends.